Greetings sailors and welcome to Patreon supporter spotlight number 62. Decided to do an all warships edition today and we're kicking off with this Akizuki game from Isham Gamer. This is going to be a reasonably short part of the video, but it'll also be fairly action filled for what it is. And although the match itself wasn't the longest, well, I've done a bit of my usual editing to speed up some bits and cut out some other bits as well. So we're getting all the good stuff, basically. So it's a top tier game, which is not bad for the Akizuki. In fact, it's very nice for any tier 8 ship, really. And it does mean that, well, although there's a couple of radars he has to worry about, there's not too many higher tier radars he has to worry about, which, of course, are going to mean longer range radars. He's also got the advantage of being quite stealthy in this thing. Although the Akizuki, it's a bit of an odd boat in that it really isn't like any of the other Japanese destroyers unless you outfit the Harikaze with one of its setups. Well, basically this setup, it can have these guns. So you've got the one torp launcher, you've got these 100mm but fast firing guns, and you actually have quite decent AA, but that all comes with a fairly terrible top speed for a destroyer. So he opens up at this enemy Z-23. I'm not 100% sure why, unless he thought he was about to get spotted anyway, but with the smoke available, he can at least finish out the cap along with this other destroyer that's here and put out his torpedoes. And you'd think the Z-23, seeing the smoke here, knowing that there's a destroyer here, knowing that destroyers generally have torpedoes, and that, you know, this isn't a Pan-Asian destroyer he's dealing with, you'd think they'd take some precautions, like maybe using their hydro. You would think. You would think. I am, of course, slightly foreshadowing the fact that you'd be wrong. And what's going to happen is, in fact, that. So that's the First Blood and Devastating Strike medals, all in one go, which is quite nice. And although they know he's here, he's not really under any immediate threat right now, so he's going to have to go looking for enemy ships at this point if he wants to get more done. So he's moved westwards a little bit and actually been picked up by the enemy Shiratsuyu and decided to open fire rather than try and dash for safety. So we're going to get to see some dodging skills in this one. In fact, we're going to get to see some of his dodging skills in this one generally, because as he's pulling into range of the, is it the D cap? No, the B cap, that'll be, won't it? That's where a whole bunch of the enemy ships went. And so he's not just exposing himself to fire from the North Carolina and whatever else might be down there, but also all these other ships that have just come round the corner as well. Suddenly life got a bit exciting, and he doesn't even have smoke back for another 25 seconds. So again, you would think, destroyer here, destroyer spotted, let's be wary of torpedoes. Nope. But that spread's not done yet. Considering this thing only gets 4 tubes, they're going to prove to be remarkably effective in this game. He's also, of course, able to use his reload booster to get the torps back as well. So a couple more hits and maybe he can finish off this North Carolina. I'm going to guess he's got IFHE on this captain, which you pretty much need to have for quite a lot of the things that you're going to see, just because these are 100mm guns, and otherwise you won't even get pens on things like ship superstructures, and at that point you're purely reliant on setting fires. So this is a destroyer where actually you will see people using a lot more AP shells, and in fact you're going to get to see Isham here using AP to some pretty good effect a little later on. But that, by the way, is one of the things that's partly going to change. This ship won't need IFHE once they make the change, the global change with destroyer armour. It won't need IFHE to pen other destroyers with its HE anymore. At least that's my understanding anyway, because it's going to basically remove some armour from destroyers, which isn't really, you know, it sounds like, oh my god, they're taking something away from destroyers, but actually it's a useful thing in terms of overpens and not getting full pens from battleship caliber shells and things of that nature. So yeah, it is actually quite handy. So we caught the edge of the Chapayev's radar. but that wasn't anything to worry about too much, so he's able to at least get some use out of this smoke to gun some things down. Up to 80k already, and we're only 7 minutes into this game. This is pretty quick by warship standards. This really is quite quick indeed. This is like, you know, this is like 3 minutes into a World of Tanks game, practically. And the enemy team at this point is completely in disarray. You know, there's actually still like 2/3 of them left alive. But they went so hard for the B cap, and they've all just clumped up around this area without really putting themselves in a position where they can effectively use firepower against Isham's team. So, yeah, there's a bit of trading going back and forth, but there's also a big island, in fact several islands in the way between some of them and the bulk of Isham's team. So it's really, it's just, they've put themselves in a losing position, essentially, and it's just a case of Isham having to work for the damage that he can out of it. And sometimes you get the opposite scenario where you're the destroyer on a badly losing team, and at that point you just end up playing for whatever damage you can. I had a game like that the other day actually in the Shenyang, where it was pretty obvious by even like 5 minutes in that we were massively going to lose, and so I just went chasing off after the enemy carrier instead, which is a thing I never do in destroyers, and ended up with like 2 solo caps and killing the enemy carrier. So I had about 60k damage at the end of it. And I ended up at top of the team list, and it wasn't because I played amazingly, it's because I just completely turned mercenary and decided I was going to get out of it while I could, because there was absolutely no way in hell it was going to be a win. Anyway, so he's landed another torpedo. That's going to be the Bismarck's Hydro, but the Bismarck's dead. And oh, it's not actually the Bismarck's Hydro at all. It's the Chapayev's radar again. And this is where that AP is actually going to come in quite useful, because for most destroyers you would just be firing HE here, but because this is a somewhat broadside Chapayev, and even though the Chapayev isn't something you necessarily want to engage at close range, he's able to put out enough damage with that rate of fire, and with the assistance of his allies to get another kill, 3rd kill, and a Confederate medal. And that's pretty much it as far as damage is concerned. They're easily going to win this one on points at slightly over the 10-minute mark, in fact approaching the 11-minute mark, and all in all it was quite a quick game, and quite a nice result considering that it was quite a quick game overall. 112k damage, in fact almost 113k damage, but he did get some nice bonuses out of inattentive enemies there, which is always a useful thing when you're playing a destroyer. Next up we have K538 in the somewhat infamous Kutuzov, and I don't really need to tell you about this ship. It can smoke, it is a light cruiser, so it gets lots of benefit from IFHE, it gets a rapid rate of fire, it has quite fast shells, and it has a very long range. So all in all it's just a ridiculously strong ship. Well, ridiculously strong in some ways. It is still, in terms of its actual armour, a light Soviet cruiser, so it's not particularly stealthy, it doesn't manoeuvre particularly well, and it doesn't have a great deal of armour to work with. And all of these factors really do combine together to mean that people tend to just only ever stay at very long ranges with this ship. And it's unusual to see people getting up close and personal, even in the late and mid game. But that's not what is going to happen in this game. It's not just going to be someone firing from a great distance over and over and over, which is a real speciality of the Soviet cruisers at the high tiers generally. And come to think of it, French and German and, well, pretty much every cruiser line actually at high tiers specialises in spamming HE at long range. There are some that have other capabilities as well, but once you get to the high tiers, once you get to tier 10 especially, you don't particularly want to go charging in a light cruiser or any kind of cruiser, because mistakes can just be punished very, very quickly. So this is going to be a pretty Kutuzov start to this game. It's just firing HE from a distance, but he's basically doing what he can to help prevent the enemy from taking this cap. And actually, of the enemy destroyers that we know there are, none of them appear to be trying to contest the middle. It's actually a Budyonny that's having a go. And on the friendly side, it is a Farragut. And I don't know if there's any radar in play in this one, actually. This is a slightly older replay anyway, I should mention, if you're wondering like why the fires are burning longer on cruisers and that kind of thing. This is actually a 0.66 replay, so we're going back to probably last year with this game. But yeah, it will be last year, actually. In fact, this is just about a year old, I think. Yeah, this is last June, so this one's been sat here a while, but anyway, I've gotten to it eventually. It's just I've had other games from K538, and apparently this was just, you know, the one that I got round to showing last. So anyway, yeah, he's been just trying to support the middle and getting some damage, and 30k damage almost from that smoke. That's not too bad, actually. That's not too bad at all. Although, if he'd gotten some more permafires on battleships, that number certainly could be higher. I've actually got a couple of unused Kutuzov replays of my own, where it's like 142k, 150k, probably maybe one or two that are even higher. But they're just not that interesting, because they're Kutuzov games where I was sitting at distance, firing IFHE of things over and over. It doesn't necessarily make for a good replay, even if it might make for a nice looking scorecard. So there's a reason why I haven't featured many of my own games in this thing. And the only reason I was playing a lot of it at one point particularly was on the NA server, because I was going up the Soviet cruiser line, and so having a Soviet cruiser captain trainer was a very, very useful thing. And you can certainly get better, more consistent results out of this thing than the Molotov, which is also a lot of fun, but is a tier 6. And so you'd rather be in this thing in a tier 10 game than a Molotov in a tier 8 game. Well, at least that's what I think. At this point, well, as you can see, the couple of allied ships even that went up to the C cap and did actually manage to cap C, they are dead now with the death of that Bismarck at the hands of the enemy Lexington, and they really could do with actually capping the B cap now that they have lost control of C. They have also capped A though, and they've basically secured that end of the map. There won't be much chance of the enemy sneaking down there and recapping that out from under them. But the downside of that is they also have two top tier battleships down there at the moment, so there's not a huge amount of support here in the middle at the moment if some big nasty ships turn up and start harassing K538. And this is just doing this is a little unusual as a sight for a Kutuzov. You'd much more often see people backing off and running away to long range and using that natural advantage rather than trying to get in a bit closer. But as it is, no, he's gone forward into the cap. There's an enemy Benson to deal with, and also, talking of big nasty ships, yep, there's a Bismarck. So at this point he's decided it is probably a good moment to actually use smoke, because that Bismarck being there, and a New Mexico as well, that could be very painful to the point of just actually being entirely fatal. On their own side, yeah, the two tier 8 battleships very slowly working their way up from A. They've also got a New Mexico who's been very unlucky with the matchmaking, so he's got to be a little bit careful here. He's only got so many hit points to work with, but this Lo Yang is at least spotting for him. Although they've gotten themselves spotted in the process by letting rip, which I wouldn't necessarily have done myself in that Lo Yang's position. I think I'd have just tried to spot for the Kutuzov in the angry smoke cloud behind me. But the Lo Yang's not dead yet, and if they can dodge and stay alive and not get burnt out by Bismarck secondaries or blatted by the main batteries of those two ships, then they might do all right. So this Bismarck is taking a bit of a thrashing at the hands of K, although he managed to get a lot of shatters on that that previous but one salvo. But that's what happens when you hit a more thickly armoured part like turrets, where even with the extra pen it's just not going to do anything. He's also burnt out that Benson, which is quite nice, but with the Lo Yang dead, his eyes are now done, so he's going to have to get out of here and hope that he survives. So torps into the smoke, and hey, did I mention this thing has 8-kilometer torps on top of everything else it has going for it. And it's not like they have the horribly restricted angles of Japanese ships either, so, you know, it just has so much going for it, this ship. It's a little bit silly. So at this point, yeah, he's just got to try and get out of here alive, and I think he's held fire with the idea of getting entirely unspotted, because that New Orleans is in smoke now, and this is, you know, this is the old tier 8 New Orleans, so they will have radar available potentially. So he's maybe only bought himself a brief respite here. Although, as he's opened fire at this point, he's got a clear line of sight to multiple ships that can spot him on the surface. So, yeah, that's the downside of having a very long range, is it means you can get spotted from very far away when you start opening fire. So he's actually, rather than trying to run out the cap, coming back in towards the island, and has gotten himself unspotted once again. And if the New Orleans comes around the corner, well, he's got torps available, and a broadside of AP also might be quite nasty. So this isn't necessarily a terrible position right now, but given his angling, if the New Orleans comes around and puts a broadside of AP into him, that could be equally nasty. But as it is, they're kind of turning away. So even though he is spotted right now, again, because he's firing, this isn't as bad as it could be, because that New Orleans has decided that rather than the low health, squashy, dangerous cruiser that's there, very close by, less than 5 kilometers away, they will instead try firing at, I'm guessing, the carrier. It might have been the New Mexico, but I don't think the New Mexico was in the line of sight. So it's one of those classic cases of somebody getting distracted by a carrier and paying the price for it. They absolutely should have tried to kill K first, but I'm going to guess he's probably quite glad that they didn't. So the remaining enemy destroyer is in the cap. He could try and guesswork a drop, and there's also a New Mexico there as well, and that was his last smoke also. This thing doesn't get a lot of smokes. If you can get this Fubuki spotted and in a position where he can shoot him, then he can just nail him very quickly. But as it turns out, he's not going to have to, because that New Mexico has finished them off instead. So the enemy team didn't really, I don't know, they didn't particularly try and group up and make any sort of massed push for B, which would probably have worked actually, given the scattered nature of 538's own team. And instead we have this weird situation where nobody is over 500 points, even though their own team has had 2 cap circles for a while, and both teams are really quite scattered. Nobody is working together particularly well on either side. So this is a perfect opportunity now. There's not that many ships left alive, and this is a battleship with a slow turret traverse who is entirely pointing their guns elsewhere. So this is about the safest time to come out and start blatting away at somebody. But there's also still a North Carolina and a Bismarck around, and that carrier, of course, as well. And as this New Mexico is now more or less broadside, he's having a go with the AP into the superstructure and upper belt, which, as you can see, is rather effective, especially at this close range. The longer ranges, of course, you pretty much would always just go with IFHE. So the New Mex is going to burn out, it looks like, which is one less problem. But there's still a North Carolina that's just around the corner, and this is the point where Spoke would be really useful, but unfortunately he just doesn't have it. And because, well, the top drop angles are pretty good, but they're not amazingly good, he's going to have to show quite a lot of leg, as it were, in order to turn and get his torps away. And the fact that he's actually now continuing this turn, well, A, it's extremely risky in terms of this North Carolina actually hitting him. But he gets away with it. And also it's a bit of a giveaway that he's dropped torpedoes as well. But he might get some hits, and his own carrier is actually now going for this North Carolina also. So although they were very healthy coming around that corner, those hit points are rapidly disappearing at this point. And if they can kill this North Carolina before they can get a reload, there we go. They're in North Carolina with a kill, who's also on very low health at this point. Then that certainly could have been a fatal situation, but as it was, he really didn't lose a lot more hit points out of it, which was quite nice. So 118k damage, and these last couple of encounters have certainly been a lot more close range than you would expect out of the average Kutuzov game, but I did say this one was going to be maybe a little bit different than you would be expecting. So with the Lexington still in play, the air threat is very much still an issue, and well, we get to see the AA in action for the first time, and it looks like they are trying to go for the North Carolina, which makes sense. I mean, the North Carolina also has dangerous AA and is actually worth more points than a cruiser, so, you know, that being the one that you go for it's logical under the circumstances. They also sent in 2 of their dive bomber squads first and actually held back half their strike, including their torp bombers, but they just strayed into range. So with the last bit of his defensive AA, he did get a couple more, but those squads, you know, there's still a chance they might sink the North Carolina. Hell, there's a chance they might sink him if they decide to go for it. So their Lexington gets their second kill, so 2 kills each per carrier, and it does seem like both carriers were more focused on doing damage rather than air control. This might have been... was this before they made the change to US carrier loadouts? I can't remember. But, you know, that might also have been a factor. So because he doesn't have a defensive left at this point, you know, his utility is somewhat limited in terms of protecting the North Carolina. But the New Mex is still alive, and they've also now got a somewhat decent idea of where this carrier might be. But even if they aren't able to find and kill this carrier, there's only a couple of minutes left on this, so if they just go and cap B at this stage, which is exactly what K538 is doing, they will easily win this game. At this stage, I did wonder why their own Lexington isn't just moving up through the middle. They're still sat down in the A cap, but maybe they were worried, because I don't know what health they're on at this point. I'd need to... I mean, I could just not be lazy, go and fire up the replay and actually see what hit points they're on. Because if they're really low health, it might be that they are worried about being spotted and the carrier coming for them and killing them. And that might be why they're sat all the way back at the other end of the map. But I don't know. If it was me, I'd have tried to get a bit closer so I wasn't having to send my planes most of the way across the map. But it wouldn't be me, though, because I don't play carriers. So, with him being the furthest forward and by far the closest ship, the Lexington is now definitely focusing on him. So that's another defensive used, and yet more plane kills. Or actually not another defensive used, it's another defensive that's just come back available. So he now has a defensive available. You can't really tell sometimes if it's just counting down towards being at the end of a use, or if it's you know, actually counting down as it's being used. But anyway, now he's had it available, he's fired it off again, he's got more plane kills, and this Lexington is easily within range, so he should actually get to finish this off by killing the enemy carrier. And it's been a close game. It's been a really close game. They did have definitely superior map control all through this, just in terms of which cap circles they owned at any given time. But the teams were so scattered, both teams were so scattered all through this, that it was just a whole bunch of little individual engagements, and it's, you know, both teams have clearly not been that far off each other in terms of actual player skills, so they've been able to get down to this situation where there's only a couple of them left alive, but crucially it was a couple more than the enemy team had left alive. So that's what we ended with. 142k damage, 3 kills, over 3,000 base XP, and their own carrier must have done alright as well, with second place 1490. But maybe the surprising thing is seeing the New Mexico being easily in the top half of the team, because that was pretty terrible matchmaking for a New Mexico. But you'd still rather be in a New Mexico than, say, the position of the enemy Budyonny, who had it really even worse. Almost 900,000 credits there as well, so yeah, the Kutuzov, it's pretty nice. Lastly, we come to Tugboat 1964 in the Fat Freddy, or as I've heard somebody else nickname it, the Ferber de Gerber, which kind of fits somehow. But I still quite like Fat Freddy. I might be slightly biased in that, you know, I did come up with it. So this is one of the newer maps in the game, Sleeping Giant. And the ship itself, I mean, it's not great. It's okay. But the Friedrich de Grosser is, it's a bit of an awkward in-between ship. Because the Bismarck, of course, at Tier 8 is pretty good, which might be a slight understatement. And then at Tier 10 you have the Grosser Kurfürst, which is basically this, but bigger and better and with more guns. So this ends up just feeling like a cut-down version of the extremely good Tier 10 ship. And as it's only got 8 guns, as it's got German dispersion, as it is quite big, and doesn't maneuver terribly well, and has all these vast expanses of deck and superstructure for all those annoying HE spamming ships like the Kutuzov to take advantage of. I mean, you know, it could be worse. It could be an Izumo, but the Izumo at least is a slightly more reliable hitter. This, of course, though, does have German secondaries on it, so if you've spec'd into them at all, you can get a pretty respectable range out of it. It's quite a squashy ship in comparison to the Bismarck, though. I think that's one of the things that does catch people out from moving from that to this. It's still quite hard to citadel, but it's easier to knock big lumps of damage off it all the same, and sometimes from angles that you wouldn't expect. So although it does have some of the German advantages going for it, it's in that really awkward in-between place where you don't yet have all the nice things that the Tier 10 has, which is just more of everything that makes it good, essentially. So for most people, this is probably going to be one that they grind through trying to get to the Tier 10 specifically. And that might be the case for Tugboat here. I don't know if he was playing this one as part of the grind or if he was just doing it for fun. But if I had to guess, it would be as part of the grind. So he's over here by the enclosed A cap, and that's a slightly awkward place to be, really, because there is some cover to fire over to the south, but there's clearly something in the A cap. In fact, there's going to be a destroyer in the A cap, and so he doesn't really want to hang around here long enough for that destroyer to pop out the other side and come and pay him a visit. And even though he does have Hydro, the Hydro is probably more best used offensively rather than defensively, at least in my experience. I mean, you can use it defensively, of course. Sometimes it's quite handy for that, but as you've only got so many charges, if you're wasting them on going by the theory that there might be a destroyer somewhere near, you know, sometimes it will absolutely save your life, and other times it'll just be a waste of a Hydro that you might have used more productively elsewhere. So they've got 2 caps. The enemy team has got 2 caps. Quite a lot of their team is over by B, I think that is. It's a little hard to tell. Or is it the D cap? I've only got the little mini-map on the little preview screen to go by, so sometimes, you know, if I get the names wrong, or if I get the cap names wrong, it's because of that, and also my memory being terrible enough not to just, you know, remember. So there's a bunch of torpedoes. It's not entirely clear what they're from. They might be cruiser torps. That's definitely not their full spread. And he's doing an interesting thing. Instead of just completely, fully pulling back, which would be sensible, he's actually starting to be a bit more aggressive, bring his front back round, and basically get into secondary range of, well, both these battleships in front of him, actually, but he's more focusing the Missouri for now. And that might just be because it is the more dangerous ship in his estimation, because it has radar, you know, more dangerous to his allies, or maybe he just really doesn't like Missouris, I don't know, or maybe he thinks it'll be easier to hurt it than the Richelieu Bow 1. That German dispersion, though, yeah, that's not uncommon. That's one of the reasons why it really, in terms of firepower, doesn't necessarily feel like a massive upgrade from the ship that came before. You don't really have more guns to work with. Whereas you get to the tier 10 and just an extra gun per turret makes such a big difference. It really does. And it's just such a nice close range brawling ship at that point, because you've got faster firing guns than a lot of your contemporaries. You've got the hydro, you've got the secondaries, you've got the turret traverse, and it's such a nice package, but it still turns absolutely horribly. So he's put on the speed, and it's a good thing too, because that's some torpedoes coming from the other side, so we know where that destroyer went. That is, however, taking him rather closer to a bunch of enemy ships, including that Des Moines, who is now paying attention to him. But the other battleship that was here got taken out by his ally, so it wasn't just purely they were all focusing on him, otherwise he would definitely have lower health by this point. So that's that Missouri dealt with, and if he can get some good hits on the Des Moines, well, that would be useful too, but there's absolutely no guarantee of it with these guns. His flank, at least, he doesn't have to worry about too much because the Roma went that way, but he's going to have to be a little bit careful crossing the mouth of the cap here, just in case there is some of the torpedoes, perhaps, that's come back in. Because we know there is a destroyer around here somewhere, we just don't know exactly where they are at the moment. Hell, I might even have tried popping the fighter plane at this point for a poor man's radar / hydro, but with the Des Moines that close, I mean, you would want to wait until that was out of the way at least. So he does in fact get some very nice hits on the Des Moines, taking him to not that much over 50k. Well, actually, he's in the mid-50s at this point, actually, isn't he? He's almost at 55k, so yeah. But he's also lost a lot of health in the process, and there are still a fair number of enemy ships left alive, although it looks like, just in terms of ship numbers and in terms of points, they are currently in the ascendant, although they did lose that Roma. So he's got a choice of either pressing forwards once again, or being a bit more sensible, trying to come back to his allies, maybe stealth up and making a turn at that point. But clearly he's feeling, on this particular day, he was feeling like being a bit more aggressive, and so instead of, even maybe trying to go into the A cap, which could have been useful in terms of capping it, but then maybe would have been quite difficult in terms of then getting out alive. No, he's just going to charge towards this Montana. And this is the part where this replay is going to start to get a little bit silly, in my opinion. Because he's already face down a lot, he's already got 2 million potential damage, and he's not done a huge amount in return for being a tier 9 battleship, although just with the unreliability of these main batteries, I probably had plenty of games like this myself, where I ended on this amount of damage. But as we get closer and closer, of course, that dispersion is going to matter a bit less, although I think it's only inside 3 kilometers that it does start to tighten up considerably. But the closer he is, the more effective his secondaries are going to be. And if the Montana's assuming that he's going for the ram, well, he's trying to turn away to avoid that, which gives Tugboat a very nice broadside to work with at extremely close range. So this next salvo should in theory be very nice, and it is over 40,000 damage. And then a helpful friendly Yugumo pops up on the other side and hoses some torps down in this direction. Yeah, well, fortunately none of those are going to hit, but that is absolutely not what you should be doing in a destroyer in this situation, and it was really just a bit of luck that those got avoided. So, in a phj.wotreplays, this is happening. He is circle strafing a Montana, essentially, and the Montana trying to desperately maneuver, because now there's a destroyer in play as well, is actually going to run themselves aground, and now his turrets are pointed the wrong way. Now that's another broadside to shoot at, and another citadel, but not enough to kill him. So this entire everything has just been, I don't know, this is just extremely silly at this point. We came into this with, what was it, around 55k? He's taken most of this Montana's hit points, and actually gets the kill with a fire set by secondaries. And he's taken a hell of a battering himself. He's put on another 400,000 potential, but he's still alive and that Montana isn't. And that Montana came into this fight with a hell of a lot more health than he did. So, yeah, German battleships, they can be fairly tough and tanky overall, and it only really gets better once you get to tier 10. So of the enemy ships, there's not a huge amount left at this point. While all that was going on, his own team, I mean, they lost 1 or 2 more ships themselves, but the enemy team has lost more. So although they are now capping D, and the enemy team very briefly has 2.5 cap circles, that's not going to last very long. And they've really not got a lot left to kill at this point. So I've sped this bit up because there's not a huge amount happening while he caps. And as you can see, the enemy Shima was also maybe not that big of a threat at any point either, because those are clearly the 20-kilometer torps. It could just be, though, that they're grinding the ship, because you do, to my knowledge, still have to grind those better torpedoes out. You don't just get given them, unfortunately. You still do see people around, however, that use the 20-kilometer torps out of choice, which is not really something you should be doing. So there's a chance for a last little bit of damage out of this, but they have basically won. They've got now 3 cap circles themselves, and it's just the Shima left that's starting to be cornered by what is that, Shima, a Yugumo, and a Des Moines. So even if that Shimakaze is able to take one of those destroyers out, there's no way they're going to survive the process. That's all well away from Tugboat, though, so his best chance of doing any more is on this Bismarck, but they're rapidly running out of hit points, so that's not going to happen, unfortunately. And rather than make you watch the entire last bit of this replay, we're going to just fast forward again and cut ahead slightly and get to the point where they do, in fact, kill the Shima just before they're about to hit 1,000 points. So, not far off 150k damage, but really it was just that whole business with the Montana that was silly and ridiculous and entertaining, and amused me, because it's not something I think I even ever got close to in the Friedrichsgröße. I have had some good close range fights in the tier 10 though, but nothing like that in the Friedrich. There we go, 88k off that Montana. That Montana alone made him have a really decent game on top of the bits of damage he was getting elsewhere. So that's just about it for this this collection of replays. Hopefully you have enjoyed them. I'm also going to throw in a very quick note at the end of this, which I probably should have thrown in at the start. But yeah, if you replied under the previous Patreon supporter video and haven't checked back, and you were one of the people that entered the random giveaway for codes, go and check, because there's still something like 1/3 of those that are unclaimed at this point. And if people don't claim them soon, I'm going to have to just give them away on Twitch or something instead. So, yep, that's it for this video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. You can do all the usual things down below. And, of course, as always, stay tuned for more.